Today, the average listener recognizes Brenda Lee primarily through a single seasonal tune, Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree, that plays unfailingly every holiday season in malls, coffee shops, and radio stations worldwide. Most folks tap their feet to the catchy beat or sing along merrily, not realizing the story behind that voice. In fact, behind the notes that evoke family dinners and festive gatherings lies the bittersweet saga of a child prodigy whose unwavering work ethic shouldered her entire household, whose star once burned as brightly as Elvis's, and who, in an unexpected turn of the music industry's wheel, found herself overshadowed and eventually nearly forgotten, except for those fleeting weeks each December. To understand how Brenda Lee climbed so high and then slipped from center stage, we have to step back into a decade of neon-lit jukeboxes and convertible cars cruising on shimmering highways. The 1950s and early 1960s in America were rife with social changes. While rock and roll was being branded with a rebellious edge, country music was anchored in tradition and strong family values. Radio and television broadcasts grew in influence, featuring unstoppable new talents who sprang up from the countryside or gritty city streets. People clamored to see the next Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, or Patsy Cline. It was an age of hope and explosive creativity, but also an age overshadowed by the demands of relentless record labels and managers. To stand out in that frenzy, you had to have something miraculous, something that grabbed people by the collar and made them listen. Brenda Lee had exactly that in her voice. It was raw, electrifying, and ripe with an emotional range that defied her young age. Born Brenda Mae Tarpley on December 11, 1944, in the tough neighborhoods of Atlanta, Georgia, her earliest memories were not of screaming fans, but of hardship and responsibility far beyond her years. Her father, an itinerant laborer with dreams of better days, died tragically young, leaving Brenda, her siblings, and her mother in precarious circumstances. Money was scarce and opportunities were few. But in those days, it wasn't unusual for children to work. If they were old enough to hold a broom, they were old enough to help the family survive. Brenda's special chore turned out to be singing. She discovered at a tender age that people were willing to pay to hear her belt out a tune. Legend has it that her voice had such a startling depth even as a child that onlookers assumed it had to be a trick, maybe someone standing behind a curtain or an older singer with a hidden microphone. But it was really just little Brenda, her vocal cords carrying the heartbreak of a family struggle. At 6 years old, she sang in local bars, radio stations, and any stage that would have her. By the time she was 10, she had appeared on national television, captivating audiences with a voice so soulful that producers compared her to the great adult vocalists of the era. These were the seeds of Little Miss Dynamite, an affectionate nickname that would follow her for the rest of her life. Being a breadwinner at 6 is as unimaginable to us now as it was to many back then. But for Brenda, there was no choice. Her mother relied on the extra income to provide basic necessities for the family. Whenever Brenda took the stage, the applause meant she'd have dinner that night. Every encore was another bill paid. This was not the glamorous side of show business that many dream of. It was a daily grind that tested the mental resilience of a young child. While other kids might have been learning multiplication tables or trading jokes in the playground, Brenda learned how to charm hardened bar patrons, memorize songs overnight, and projected her voice over the din of laughter and cigarette smoke. And she did it all with an irrepressible spark that enchanted anyone who heard her. In interviews decades later, Brenda Lee would recall how she never felt she had a real childhood. Long summer days with friends at the local swimming hole, or lazy nights spent gossiping about boys, were luxuries she couldn't afford. Instead, she hopped from one stage to another, pressed onward by the unwavering hands of managers, family members, and record label representatives who recognized her money-making potential. She was grateful for an outlet to help her family, but it also meant carrying a burden no child should have to bear. The heartbreak behind her father's absence and her mother's financial struggle seemed to give her an emotional reserve that, ironically, blossomed into one of the most soulful voices in American music. Her first major breakthrough came when she was barely 12. Invited to perform at the Grand Ole Opry, a dream for countless country performers, Brenda electrified the famed audience at Ryman Auditorium. With no fear or sign of stage fright, she belted out songs that typically only seasoned singers dared to attempt. The reaction was immediate and thunderous. She was labeled a phenomenon. Industry professionals scrambled to sign her, promote her, and package her to the waiting world. Here was a child who sang like she had lived 100 lifetimes. Journalists swooned, radio DJs marveled, the future stretched out before her, glittering with potential. Yet with every new success, the practical matter of money loomed. Even after signing with a record label, Brenda's finances were entangled in a web of adult interests. Managers took their cut, the label took another, and family members took what they needed. In a sense, she was a child laborer in a grown-up's world of profit and loss. Much later, she confessed to feeling like a machine. Her only function was to perform, to create hits, to keep everyone afloat. School was an afterthought. Stable friendships were elusive. Her life revolved around rehearsals, recordings, and tour stops. To call it a whirlwind is an understatement. She was living on the road, traveling for radio spots and live appearances, all the while still a preteen who could barely see over the steering wheel if she tried to drive. By 1958, Brenda Lee was 13 and on track to record a song that would weave itself into the fabric of American Christmas tradition for generations to come. Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree was penned by Johnny Marks, who also wrote classics like Rudolph, the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Marks recognized something in Brenda's voice, an uncanny mixture of youthful cheer and grown-up conviction. Her label, Decca, scheduled the recording session during the hot months of the year, so she had to muster that festive spirit in the sweltering Nashville heat. At the time, the song gained some moderate traction, but was far from an overnight sensation. No one, including Brenda, foresaw that this holiday tune would eventually become a perennial favorite, generating new waves of royalties every winter and becoming the theme song to countless holiday parties, commercials, and heartwarming movie scenes. For all the hits she recorded as a teenager, I'm Sorry, Sweet Nothings, Fool Number One, and many more, it was that single Christmas recording session that eventually came to define her legacy in the mainstream. She had nearly 50 chart hits throughout the 1960s, an astonishing feat for someone who started so young. But despite regular top spots in the charts and significant commercial success, pop culture can be fickle. Other young artists stepped onto the scene. Elvis Presley transformed from a rebellious phenomenon to a Hollywood mainstay. The Beatles led the British invasion. Ray Charles infused R&B with soul. And once the 1970s arrived, the entire musical landscape seemed to change almost overnight. The pressure on Brenda was immense. Here was a teen idol about to age out of her cuteness factor, competing in an industry that prized novelty and shock value. She had a legion of fans, but music trends were shifting in unpredictable ways. The emergence of folk, rock, and later disco seemed to push her wholesome image to the margins. She tried to adapt, shifting from rockabilly and pop to country, and sometimes back again, seeking to find a comfortable niche that matched her heartfelt vocal style. Yet each pivot felt less like a creative journey and more like a forced reinvention to stay marketable. Record executives, once fiercely loyal, began to gamble on the new wave of artists. Younger faces, fresh styles, and scandalous headlines sold records. Brenda Lee, with no major controversies, simply wasn't generating the same media frenzy. During her prime, she had been unstoppable, a petite teen known for her hair-trigger voice that leapt from sweet lullabies to spirited rockers. She sold out shows, performed on television, and mingled with the era's legendary performers. The audience adored her, and for a time so did the press. Then gradually the coverage slowed to a trickle. Fewer interviews, fewer major headlining shows. Her once unstoppable Billboard hits received less and less airplay. While she still carried on touring, the scale was smaller. State fairs, community events, the occasional club date. Even though she never completely disappeared, her voice remained intact, rich, and full of that same emotional undertow. She was overshadowed by the unstoppable waves of disco, heavy rock, and other newer genres dominating the late 1970s and early 1980s. For many artists, the path to remaining relevant includes staging elaborate comebacks, engaging in high-profile controversies, or orchestrating personal dramas that the tabloids lap up. Brenda Lee had none of these. Her personal life remained largely free of scandal. She married Ronnie Shacklet in 1963 at the age of 18. Remarkably for show business, they stayed together, decade after decade. She never had the wild episodes of self-destruction or substance abuse that the media often fixates upon. Instead, her personal demons manifested in quiet, internal battles, bouts of depression, loneliness, and the lingering heartbreak of feeling perpetually indebted to an industry that often took more than it gave. Looking back, the brash, sensational aspects of the entertainment world were never her style. Even at the peak of her fame, she spent her spare hours writing letters to fans, praying with close friends, or catching her breath from the constant touring that had marked her life from early childhood. In a way, her normalcy, once praised for its authenticity, might have worked against her in the cutthroat, headline-driven press cycle of the modern music industry. Sensational stories sell. Her career, though extraordinary in accomplishments, was free of massive meltdowns, criminal mischief, or romantic scandals. And that is precisely the tragedy of her mainstream memory. It's easier for the public to recall fiascos than quiet, consistent brilliance. By the 1970s, Brenda turned to country music for a revival of sorts. While she charted a handful of hits on the country scene, the level of success she had known in her teens proved elusive. Radio stations found new darlings to promote. Younger country stars emerged, building massive followings. Though she was a pioneer in bridging the gap between rockabilly, pop, and country, the industry was more eager to push forward with fresh talent. To complicate matters, her voice, though still potent, faced wear and tear from continuous touring and performances. At times, she underwent vocal rest or minor medical procedures, trying to hold on to her powerful range. Despite the setbacks, Brenda soldiered on, singing wherever and whenever people would listen. She was not too proud to play at local festivals, community theaters, or fundraisers for charitable causes. Fans who encountered her were dazzled to find that, in person, she was just as approachable as that wide-eyed young girl they had once seen on black and white television. She never lost her sense of gratitude for the career she'd had, nor her humility about the ephemeral nature of fame. While the industry's brightest lights moved on to fresh faces, Brenda stuck to her craft, determined to make every note count. Privately, she navigated an emotional chasm. Having spent a life on stages, constantly around people, she harbored a surprising amount of loneliness. In a rare interview, she confided that while thousands of people had heard her sing, very few took the time to truly understand her. She once hinted that her greatest sorrow was knowing how quickly the world forgets. Even as she heard her own Christmas anthem playing in shopping malls each December, an echo of a younger self, she realized people barely recognized the name or face behind the music. It was as if her entire identity had been whittled down to a single holiday tune. Yet ironically, the success of Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree continued to swell year by year. Television commercials, festive playlists, and Christmas movie soundtracks repeatedly showcased this bouncy, cheerful staple. It became the background to countless Yuletide memories, from children unwrapping presents to couples sharing a kiss under the mistletoe. And all the while, as the new generations discovered the song, they rarely connected that voice to Little Miss Dynamite, who had once commanded the respect of legends like Elvis Presley. The holiday tune became bigger than Brenda Lee herself, overshadowing the remarkable discography she had amassed. You might wonder, how could a vocalist who had more hits in the 1960s than almost any other female artist outside of chart toppers like Aretha Franklin slip into such relative obscurity? One factor is timing. Brenda's earliest success came before the British invasion, before the pop culture phenomenon pivoted toward bands who wrote their own songs, played instruments, and captivated rebellious youth. Another factor is her personal background. Coming from a poor Southern family with no significant lineage or industry connections, she was reliant on the delicate, fickle system of managers and record labels that championed her when she was novel but moved on to the next big thing when her novelty faded. There is also a broader lesson in the story of how music history is recorded. Media outlets and historians tend to remember megastars and tragic cautionary tales, or artists whose cultural influence can be easily tied to major social movements, like the Beatles, who heralded a massive cultural shift, or Janis Joplin, whose personal demons became the stuff of legend. Brenda Lee's narrative wasn't so easily packaged. She was a genuine talent whose personal lifestyle didn't produce front-page headlines. She didn't become a cautionary example of the dangers of fame, nor did she attach her name to a major political cause. That type of steadiness can lead to the quiet disappearance from mainstream memory, especially when overshadowed by the bombast of other, more controversial or theatrically tragic figures. However, those who worked with Brenda remember her with astonishing respect. Elvis, as noted, was openly admiring. The Beatles, upon crossing paths, were reportedly impressed by her vocal prowess. Ray Charles was said to have complimented her on the depth of feeling she brought to her recordings. Industry veterans who weathered the decades agree that Brenda Lee possessed a level of vocal control, pitch accuracy, and emotional nuance that was rare, if not unparalleled, among her peers. There are stories of how producers would stand slack-jawed in the control booth as she nailed a challenging passage in a single take, an almost supernatural level of precision, especially when you consider how young she was. For those close to her, one of the toughest aspects of Brenda's journey was the realization that she wasn't ever allowed to fall from grace and then come back in a blaze of redemptive glory. There was no dramatic meltdown, no drug bust, no divorce drama, and no big tabloid war that might have spurred a highly publicized comeback. Her life was dotted with average, everyday heartbreaks that didn't make for sensational headlines. She quietly persevered, loving music with every fiber of her being, and continuing to show up for her fans, however many or few remained. And in a showbiz landscape that often celebrates tragedy and sensational stories, that quiet perseverance was almost invisible to the broader public eye. Perhaps the single greatest irony is that her biggest holiday standard resurfaces every December like a ghost from the past, a cheerful reminder of a star whose prime soared beyond that tune alone. The moment the song begins, its jaunty guitar chords and bright saxophone lines, listeners around the world smile and launch into holiday mode, rarely stopping to think, who is that singer and what is her story? For Brenda, it's both a blessing and a subtle heartbreak. On one hand, it provides her some measure of ongoing recognition and royalties. On the other, she remains tethered to a memory of her 13-year-old self, overshadowing the intricate tapestry of her entire musical life. Despite all this, Brenda Lee's significance in music history cannot be denied. If nothing else, her early success paved the way for future child stars, though many of them eventually faced the same cycles of meteoric rise and precipitous fall. She also bridged the gap between country, pop, and rockabilly at a time when strict genre boundaries tended to keep fans segregated. That alone was a remarkable feat, as it exposed different listener groups to her music, making her a uniting figure across multiple scenes. Some historians argue that her fluidity in musical genres helped pave the way for crossover sensations later in the century. If we listen to her voice today, away from the blur of nostalgia, we can hear a raw sincerity that few can replicate. Her phrasing and the way she attacked certain notes revealed an understanding of heartbreak and joy that seemed beyond her years, especially in her earliest recordings. It's little wonder that Elvis Presley himself showed public admiration. He must have recognized in her a kindred spirit, someone who sang from the depths of her being and not merely from training or imitation. Indeed, in a world that can too easily dismiss 1960s teen idols as fleeting phenomena, Brenda stands apart for the staying power of her voice alone. And that wraps up today's video. If this video resonated with you, please give it a like, leave a comment with your feedback, and subscribe to stay updated on upcoming videos. Appreciate you watching.